Hi, this is Flipped Classroom dealing with style, writing style in particular, and it's associated with a critical reading practice, connecting technique to meaning, which is one of the main things we do in this class. Look at the children on the right, weaving that tapestry. Well, consider this. Every author's writing style is a tapestry, woven from different kinds of threads, but among the most significant threads are the following. Can you guess? Johnny in the back? Yes, indeed, it's diction. Well done, Johnny. And Susie, do you know one? Ooh, superstar. Susie tells us about syntax. And oh yes, Robbie, imagery. Let's see, Maud. Hey, Maud. Indeed, figurative language. So those could be considered the threads that weave together to create an author's style. First of those threads we'll consider is diction, word choice. Well, there's lots of ways to analyze word choice. Words can be precise and accurate or vague and incorrect. But four criteria or four ways that are often used to analyze diction in a work of literature are the following. Evaluating their formality. Are they basically informal or formal? Evaluating them based on whether they're concrete and specific or more abstract and general. No writer is going to write entirely with one of these or the other, but it's the tendency. A third could be about the sound of the words that generally get used. Euphonious words are pleasant sounding, butterfly, lullaby. I don't know if it's all things that end in I, but those are pleasant sounding. And most of us would agree that a word like puke is cacophonous, creating cacophony. A fourth has to do with just the number of syllables in each word. Monosyllabic words or polysyllabic, whether that's 2 syllables or 20, although I don't think there are any that long. Syntax is the second thread. It's essentially sentence structure or word order or phrase order. It's the way that words and phrases get put together to create meaning. Here are 4 criteria that you can use to analyze it. Sentence length. We've got telegraphic for the very short ones, medium, and then long and involved. You'll want to look for patterns among your writer when you're analyzing her style. A second is looking at sentence patterns. Sorry to use that word twice, but we've got these 4 things: a declarative sentence, an imperative sentence, an interrogative sentence, and an exclamatory sentence. Would be the difference between the king is sick or get sick king, I guess. Is the king sick? The king is dead! Long live the king. And then there's also sentence type from a grammatical standpoint. Are these simple sentences or compound, complex, or compound complex? And I believe you've had some instruction on that in the past, but we'll go over it to refresh. That's syntax. That's the second thread. Our third thread is imagery. This is language that appeals to our senses. And we've got 5 of those, or maybe 6 if you can see dead people. But imagery has a specific term for each of the senses that it appeals to. And the primary one is visual imagery, and visual usually gets dropped from that because as human beings, the sense that we rely on more than any other is our visual sense. But then we have language that appeals to sound. It's called auditory imagery. For example, you're gonna hear me roar, or language that appeals to our sense of smell, olfactory imagery. Because you can imagine if you went to an old factory, ooh. But my example, he was certain some roses had just walked by. Now that's also a metaphor or a personification. Excuse me, roses are walking by, but we can smell them. That's what's suggested. Language that appeals to our sense of taste is called gustatory imagery. From her years body surfing, she knew the taste of salt and seaweed. Tasty. Our sense of touch, that would be called tactile imagery. And here's an example. Be careful. And then beyond our five senses, language that appeals to or describes internal sensations is called organic imagery. And here's an example. As the curtains rose, his stomach exploded with, well, butterflies, I suppose, is the more appropriate term, but orcas, because he was so filled with life. And then language that appeals to or describes movement or tension is called kinesthetic imagery. For example, the fly writhed and struggled, but couldn't release itself from the spider's web. You can see that fly doing that. Tasty. Last thread is called figurative language thread, and I'm just going to go over some figures of speech, not all. Metaphor, comparison between two things that's sometimes direct or sometimes implied. Here's a direct one. Her car is a dragon. And here would be an implied one. Her car breathes fire and smoke. They're both saying the same thing. One's implied, one's direct. Now a simile just usually uses some specific words to make the comparison explicit. Her car is like a dragon. What does that mean? And then we have personification, which, like simile, is a type of metaphor. And here's an example of that. When she turned the key, her car greeted her with a gruff, "Good morning." That would be personifying the car, not the dragon. A couple of other figures of speech follow. We've got paradox, a seeming contradiction between two things and yet somehow reveals truth. Here's an example. Perhaps this is our strange and haunting paradox here in America, that we are fixed and certain only when we are in movement. So the fixed and certain contrasts with the movement, but the paradox is understood because the fixed and certain in the second sense is taken figuratively, not literally. That we're fixed and certain like in our soul or in our psyche. We are where we belong in a figurative sense. Hyperbole, not hyperbole. Hyperbole is another one. It's just exaggeration for emphasis. Meow. And then we have understatement, for which we will rely on Holden. There's an example of understatement. Just one slide left. This is just for some fun. Can you figure out what's going on? Weird.